Hey there, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. My name is Erin, and today's video is the first in a series of collaboration series that I'm doing with Stacy from Stacy J's Studio. So if you are over here from her channel, thank you so much for trusting her recommendation and coming over here to my little corner of the sewing community. I hope you enjoy this video and hit the subscribe button so you can see our future videos and all of the other content I make. I, like Stacy, do Friday Sews videos every Friday where we do a little weekly catch up and talk about a little bit of life. And then I have videos that come out on Wednesdays about just other sewing stuff. So let's talk about Stacy for a moment. As I said, she is a huge fan of Style Arc. She is also a professional seamstress, tailoress. She sews professionally, garment maker person. She is a professional. She has clients, she has contracts, she has very important clients. So she knows what she's doing. And she decided to give herself the challenge of hacking the pattern. So I'm going to be making each variation as it tells me to. I will make adjustments for fit as we go along, but other than that, I'm just making it how it wants me to do it. Stacy is going to be making variations. If you've not watched any of Stacy's videos, please go check her out. Like I said, she's a professional, and she also is a very chatty. Like, putting her videos on is like sitting in her sewing studio and just having a chat with her. She has funny stories, she makes all kinds of stuff. So yeah, like I said, if you are one of my regular viewers, or if you're just stumbling across this video because you're interested in the Porter woven pack and you have not seen Stacy's video, I will link her video down below. Her channel will be linked, all of the stuff about her. So definitely head on over there after you watch my video and check her out. Today, as you will have seen by the title, we are doing collaboration about the Style Arc Porter woven pack. This is a monster of a pattern, you guys. Like, they just did everything. Everything's a pants, basically, and outerwear and stuff. But you know, there is a lot in this pattern. So I do have the hard copy. This is the Porter woven pack. And as you can see, it comes with multiple top options, different sleeve variations, a skirt. You can obviously make just the top, or you can make a dress with all of those variations, different closures. That was the one thing that really drew me to it, was all the different closures. So this is what we decided to make. Stacy reached out to me asking if I wanted to do collaboration, and I was like, yes, of course. So we started talking about it and planning it, and I had recently purchased this. So I told her I wanted to do this, and she is a huge Style Arc fan. She has, I think, every single Style Arc pattern that has ever been made in the history of the company. So she was like, yes, I have that. And then she had the very brilliant and semi-daunting idea of making it a series and doing everything that they have to offer, pretty much, doing multiple variations. So today we are starting with just the top, the sleeveless top. In my mind, it's a vest, so I'm just gonna call it a vest from here on out, but it's a sleeveless top with a closure down the front. That is the first one, and then we are also going to do the top option with a sleeve variation. Then we're going to do the skirt and the dress is the plan. So it is a 4-month collaboration series, and this is the first month. Now, let's talk about this pattern. As I said, making the vest, I chose to do version A, which has the loop closures. I did not make any adjustments. I decided to just do it as is and kind of use it as a wearable toile of the bodice, knowing that we're going to be making more versions down the road. So that is what I did. And then I chose to do a size 14. Now my measurements put me into a size 16, but it's kind of an oversized look. And I, a couple months ago, made the Style Arc Nova midi dress, which has a very similar bodice in terms of the darts and the fit and stuff. And I made a size 16, I want to say, and it was a little oversized. I wish I had gone down a size. So that's what I chose to do on this one. I made my top out of this seersucker that I got in a Mystery Fabric Mart bundle. I had so many winners in that box. I do recommend getting a mystery bundle from Fabric Mart if you live in the US, and that is an option, especially when they have the $1 shipping. It's a great deal. I will link that video also. But this is a plaid seersucker that I got in that mystery bundle. I still have quite a lot of it left because this really did not take much fabric at all. So for the size I made, if you're doing just the bodice or top, it's gonna take 1.38 yards for a size 14 to 18. So I don't even know if it took quite that much, honestly. Part of the reason is because this binding for the arm side, I used store-bought binding. I didn't make my own because I wasn't really sure how the seersucker would go with that, but we'll talk about that later. It was overall an easy sew, no real issues, some head scratching moments, but we'll talk about those. But overall, yeah, an easy sew, and I do like it. I will have the Porter Woven Pack linked below. I think I actually got mine in a sale they had, but it is, like I said, a monster of a pattern. So I got the printed version, and it has 3 separate, these have got to be bigger than A0. I'm not quite sure, but they're huge sheets with everything because there are some different bodice pieces for the different views, as well as in different facings and things like that. So it is a huge pattern. It goes from a US size 0 to US size 32. One thing about Style Arc patterns that I don't understand, will never understand, is they have finished garment measurements on their patterns. They don't have body measurements. And I've talked about this before when I've talked about Style Arc. I get it, sort of, because most of the time we're making our sizing decision based off of finished garment measurements, but I want the body measurements right here so that I can compare them because I want to know what kind of ease they're trying to give me. Just that, then I can know their intention, I guess, is kind of how I feel about it. So the finished garment measurements, we will just go ahead and do the chest of the bodice. It goes from a 33 1/8 inch to a 61 inch. So pretty good size run there. Like other Style Arc patterns, they have it available either multi-size printed, multi-size PDF, or they do offer single sizes, but there's not a price difference. So my recommendation is to get the multi-size. So that's just me. The fabric suggestions are cotton, rayon, crepe, or washed linen. So I do think this cotton seersucker technically qualifies, counts as like a choice. And then it has all of the different buttons and things like that that you would need for your notions. Like most Style Arc patterns, the instructions are pretty compact. It's gonna be a little hard to show you because I have this printed version, but it has this front page where it talks about all the different views you can do. I do have some bones to pick, but don't I always? Here are the helpful hints, which, okay, so it has a little description. It says optional inside armhole binding for sleeveless style, but it's not really optional because it doesn't give you another way to do it. I mean, you could do it other ways. You could drop to facing, or you could just fold it in and then top stitch it down, I guess. But it's like optional. It's not optional when that's how you want me to do it. Sorry. I also hate that they put the seam allowance in the helpful hints. That's not a helpful hint. That is information I need to know. So the seam allowances are 3/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch marked on each pattern piece with a dashed line. This is another bone to pick. Another bone I have picked. Another thing I have found kind of annoying about Style Arc patterns is that the seam allowances are not mentioned at all in the pattern instructions. They are only on the pattern pieces. And like, especially with this where there are so many pieces, it's annoying to keep all of the pattern pieces out. And I know I could go in and write it in the instructions. I could just remember in my brain what they are. But when I try to remember things like that, I'll be like, okay, 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. I go to sew it, I'm like, 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch. So I like to have it written down. And I'm not gonna go through and write it on the instructions for every single thing I'm sewing, for every seam I'm gonna sew. So I keep the pattern pieces out, which I don't really like to do because it's just messy and I'm gonna lose one and it's traced, so I could trace it again, but I don't wanna have to trace it again if I already traced it, whatever. So I keep the pattern pieces out so that I can reference it, and I just find that to be kind of annoying. Like, it's not that difficult to write the seam allowance in there. Or say like, 3/8 of an inch unless otherwise, and then only put it where you need it to be 1/4 of an inch or something. Like, there's a better way to do it. A lot of other companies do it. It's not that hard. So that is my rant about seam allowance not being a helpful hint. Tell me what it is. And then one note that I thought was interesting is that bodice D is for the dress only and not a standalone top. You can, of course, make it a top if you prefer, using your own hem finishing method. So the hems of the rest of these, A, B, and C, are finished with facings. And then D, like it says, you can, but it's not, they don't give you the facings to finish it, which I just don't get. Like, if you do it for the other tops, why not do it for that one? I don't understand. But like I said, there are different bodice pieces. A and B have the same bodice pieces, and then C and D have separate bodice pieces. I looked at them and I kind of held my trace bodice piece over, and I didn't, there's like slight differences, but I don't think they're big enough differences that it was worth having them be all separate pieces. Like, I feel like that's an area where they could have saved effort and time and some paper and made them all one piece. Not really sure what the point of that was. Maybe in future versions when I make other views, I don't know what to call them because I don't have them listed as views. When I make other bodices and other variations, maybe I'll understand more why they're a little different, but right now I could not tell you why. So, that is it for the couple hints. It gives you what all of the pieces are and stuff like that. There are a lot, and I've talked about this before with indie patterns that have a lot of variations, and it's something I like to complain about but don't really want changed. And that's the fact that when there's so many variations, I'm like kind of overwhelmed. And I'm really glad Stacey suggested doing it this way, because I get to make a lot of different pieces and try different variations. Because if I had just been like making a dress, it would have been like, what closure should I use? What sleeve should I use? What bodice should I use? All of that stuff. So there's an overwhelming number of options, and I'm glad I get to kind of work through multiple of them, but it makes things just kind of confusing. Not confusing, just hard to muddle through. So like, here's the list of all of the pieces, and it does include which ones to cut them for, but then it'll be like, you know, this is for the top only, this is for the dress only, this is for the dress and the top, this is for D, the dress only. And like, it's just a lot. I had to go through multiple times and make a little checklist to make sure I cut everything out. And then I even forgot to cut the back hem facing because there was just so much. But I got there. I clearly figured it all out. I have a finished product. Then we're gonna move into the instructions, which on the printed pattern are kind of weird. So you have this, you fold it out, and then the instructions start with this page. So you start on the lower right. Basically, they work from the bottom across to the right. No, yeah, across to the right, and then you go up to the line above it to continue reading. But you have to unfold, because of the way it's folded, you have to unfold it and have it all out. Let me stand up on my little stool. So because it folds this way, you have to do it like this. See what I mean? Like, you have to have this unfolded, unless you want to change the folding and have this crease go the opposite way. Anyway, it just takes up a lot of space. So be aware, if you have the printed version, you got to have like a big workspace to have the instructions out, unless you're going to do a lot of origami folding to make it neater. They do offer a tutorial. Now, I think tutorial is a very loose word for style arc, because it is the same instructions, both photographs instead of diagrams. Like, I don't really call it a tutorial. It's the instructions with different pictures. I didn't think it was that helpful personally. It wasn't any more helpful than the instructions. That is all of the basic stuff about it. Now, like other patterns I have talked about that have the whole choose your own adventure thing, there's just a lot in here. And because of how, like, thankfully these pages are numbered, on here, so I was able to pretty easily figure out which order they go in. But it is very much a like, okay, now if you're doing this option, go over here and then come back here. And then if you're doing this option, go over here and come back here. Which is just, it always makes me feel like I'm missing something, but I'm getting better at following the thread. But it does just make me feel like I'm missing something. Now, talking through the construction, very straightforward. A lot of facings. Like, it's facings everywhere except the arm side. I was kind of surprised they didn't have me do a facing here. This is a double binding. So yeah, everything is faced. And then, like I said, I did the option with the loops. Now, let's talk about these loops. Because this was the first, I don't know, I'm not going to say a frustration, because it wasn't necessarily well, I don't know, kind of frustrating. This is the piece for the loops. Okay, it is 1 inch wide with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is what you end up with. Turning this was a challenge. Now, the other thing is it does not tell you to trim the seam allowance. So you sew the seam, you have to trim the seam allowance, basically. I mean, you could try to turn it, you can maybe muscle it through, but it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance and you're ending up with a 1/4 inch wide loop. So like, that bad boy's gonna be thick. Go ahead and trim your seam allowance. Then, I do not have a loop turner. I don't think I've ever turned anything this thin or this long that required it, so I don't have one. It's one of those tools that I'm like, oh, I'll buy it someday. Should have bought it the day before I did this, to be quite honest, but I made it work. What I had to do was I used a combination of tweezers and a knitting needle, which I don't recommend because I did poke some holes in the fabric. Thankfully, the piece is long enough that I could toss some pieces of it and I had some left over, but I got it turned sort of. I would get a section done and then have to cut it and use the tweezers to pull out the end and finish turning it. Thankfully, like I said, you have enough excess, especially depending how big your loops need to be, because it does just say make them big enough for your button, which makes sense. It does recommend a button size, but like use whatever buttons you feel like using and then just make sure the loop is big enough to go around them and then have some, seam allowance on the inside so they can be attached. Once I figured out that I could just kind of like get it stuffed in there as far as I could, cut it and pull it out, my life got a lot easier. Prior to that, I was brainstorming other options. That's the phase I was in. I wasn't super angry or frustrated or anything. I was just like, well, what else can I use? I thought about elastic cord, because I do have the really thin, like black elastic cord. Thought about little ribbon. So, there are other options if you just really don't want to turn that loop, because that was my quitting point that night. I was like, once I get this turned, I'm done. And I walked away from it after that. And then everything was pretty straightforward. Like I said, I did do the optional guard. Attaching that was easy. The picture was like a little confusing at first, but it's one of those things, once I saw it. You just attach it to the middle of the facing. You sew it flat down to the middle of the facing. So you have, this is the facing piece. This is the guard piece. And then this is the marking for the guard, right down the middle. So you just attach it like that. Well, attach it like that on one side. Easy enough. So that was totally fine. My next head scratching moment was doing the sleeveless double bind, as they call it. Now this was one of the points in the pattern where you're doing the bodice or top A, and you get to it and it's like, okay, now if you're doing the sleeveless version, go over here. So I went over there in the pattern. It does have a pattern piece. You cut 2 of these on the bias. I, as I mentioned earlier, decided not to cut it from the main fabric because I wasn't sure with the seersucker texture how that would play out. And I knew it would take up kind of a big chunk of my fabric, and I could see how much I was going to have left over. And I wanted to preserve as much of that as I could for hopefully a pair of pants or shorts or something. But I wanted to just preserve as much of that as I could, and I wanted to be a little lazy, so I used store-bought binding. I do tend to find that purchase binding is not as pliable as when I make it from the same fabric. It always seems to be a lot stiffer. This pattern piece is 1 1/4 inch. Then it has 1/4 inch seam allowance, which really is just you fold it together, wrong sides together, and stay stitch it, which they phrased so weirdly. Side note, with right sides on the outer, no punctuation. With right sides on the outer, fold the binding in half lengthwise. There needed to be a comma. With right sides on the outer, fold the binding in half lengthways. That just makes more sense. And sew a stay stitch to the 2 raw edges. Why can't you just say with wrong sides together? They use wrong sides together other places, right sides together. They use very standard verbiage other places. That was just so weird. I was like, with right sides on the outer fold. Because when you read it, it's right sides on the outer fold. Because there should be a comma. Anyway, punctuation matters, people. I clearly figured it out. But, so I did figure it out. I did that. I basically just used the fact that the store-bought binding was 1 inch wide. Ironed out all the creases from it being folded in the package and folded it in half and then did the stay stitch. And then when I placed it, you are supposed to place it raw edges all together, with right sides together. I just made sure that I moved my binding in 1/8 of an inch, because with this being 1 1/4 inches, you fold it in half, that's 5/8 of an inch. Mine folded in half was 1/2 inch. So I just made sure I moved it in 1/8 of an inch, which was not perfect the whole way around, but it's close enough, good enough. It works. My next issue was also with the binding and just them, again, not saying anything about trimming a seam allowance. So you have your 5/8 of an inch binding. I mean, if we're talking that you made it yourself like you were supposed to. Then you have your pattern piece. Also, this ties in with them not really clarifying seam allowances. So I, in my head, was like, okay, this 1/4 of an inch is just for the stay stitching, because on the actual pattern piece for the bodices, front and back, it's 3/8 of an inch seam allowance there. But is that 3/8 of an inch if you're attaching the sleeves, or is it 3/8 of an inch no matter what you're doing? I went with no matter what you're doing, so to include the binding, because it doesn't say otherwise. You're sewing 3/8 of an inch. Now 5/8 of an inch minus 3/8 of an inch is 1/4 of an inch. So you have a 1/4 inch here. That's going to be the binding you understitch and fold under. So you have to trim the seam allowance. You have 3/8 of an inch seam allowance there. You have to trim it. Which, again, it's a problem that, like, you look at it, you realize it's a problem, you realize how to fix it, you do it, but it's just annoying that they couldn't say, like, trim seam allowance. Put that in there, because then I was staring at these binding instructions that I had already been kind of annoyed with the wording. I'm apparently very particular about the wording of patterns. I'd kind of already been annoyed by that. And I'm looking at it thinking, am I missing something? What am I doing wrong here? I'm clearly missing something. I don't think I was. I think they just don't like to tell you to trim seam allowances, because, I mean, it's a problem you can identify and solve. They don't have to spell it out. It just would be nice. Also, if they would clarify the seam allowance. On the same note of the arm side, I recently did a different collaboration with Tanya from Just Let Me Sew, where we sewed the same new look pattern and she made the sleeveless version of it. Now, in those pattern instructions, it did say it used the same bodice piece, but it said if you are making the sleeveless version to shave the pattern piece in, I think, 1/4 of an inch. She, in her video, talked through how much more she brought it in and then kind of like scooped it out and stuff to make it lay like a sleeveless top and not just a top without sleeves, because that fits a little different. I will link that video down below because she did a really good job talking through it. But this didn't even have you shave in a little bit to make it sleeveless. I think because it's a whole vest look and it's kind of like boxy. So I knew that would be an issue going in, or at least once I read the instructions and realized it didn't have me make any modifications for it to be a sleeveless top versus just a top without sleeves. So I knew that and I'm fine with it. But I think if I were to do the sleeveless version again, which I probably won't, I don't really like sleeveless stuff that much, I would want to bring it in a little more, make it just a little more flattering. I don't know, not a huge deal, but just a note, they don't really have you change the shaping at all, like at all. So that is the binding. That was kind of the last head scratching moment. I did do a facing, or had you do a facing on the bottom. That was all well explained in my opinion and easy to execute. And then you do top stitch it down, because or else they would kind of flop out because gravity's a thing. So I had a really well matched gray thread. I don't think you can see the top stitching like at all. It's right here. Like you really can't see it. So then you finish it all off But then it just has like, okay, top stitch the hem facing. Then that's it. Like it doesn't say anything about sewing buttons or anything on right there. You go back to page 9 where we were for the binding. You skip the binding part, you skip the pockets and skirt part, and then completion. And it just says neaten the skirt hem with an overlock or serger, turn the hem to the inside at the notch and top stitch, sew the buttonholes to the styles that have buttonholes, and sew corresponding buttons to the left bodice. 8, press your new dress. So here's like my overarching impression. This is a dress pattern. This is a dress pattern with a lot of options to be different styles of dresses, a dress pattern with a lot of variations, but a dress pattern that they looked at and they were like, well, you could make some tops and you could make some sleeveless tops and you can make a skirt, because there are no instructions for the skirt alone. I'll probably go a lot more into that when we do the skirt, but there are no instructions for just doing the skirt. But on the picture where it shows you all the variations, it shows you just a skirt. It just doesn't give you instructions for it. Like I said, I'll sew the skirt. I'll have more thoughts then. But my impression, based on that verbiage of finishing it and stuff, is that this was a dress pattern that they decided to make more. But they didn't draft it any differently or change anything, really. The only difference between the bodice pieces for the dress and the top is that it's about 1.5 inches shorter. They did include, okay, I will say they included all of like the hem facings and stuff like that if you were doing the top version. So I'm not gonna say that they totally like half bootied that, but I very much think this is a dress pattern that they made more without focusing on all of the pieces of it. So that is my overall impression and my construction experience. Let's talk about mine. I've already shown you a lot of aspects of it. The pattern matching is A+, like A++++. I did a phenomenal job pattern matching. I'm just gonna go ahead and toot my own horn because we need to be our own hype people. But I have video I'll include, actually. I have video, I'll just put that. But it is so good. I did use a video that a subscriber told me about. I will link that down below to kind of help give me some ideas and stuff. The biggest thing with pattern matching is you just have to make sure you take into account the seam allowance. This was not the most difficult pattern in the world to match, right? Because it's small scale, repeats regularly. So I wasn't taking up like huge pieces of fabric trying to match it or anything like that. But I did do a really good job matching. The other thing I will say is that I've been using glue as a tool so much since I did the Reddit sewing tips video a couple weeks ago. Someone in there commented that they used glue a lot, and I, in my video, talked about the fact that I have heard of glue being used for like quilt basting and stuff, but I've always been scared that it would gum up my machine. Multiple people commented and were like, it won't. And they were like, hit it with an iron for a little bit if you're worried about it, but like it won't. And it hasn't, and it's been so useful, and it was so useful for matching up this pattern on the side seams. On the front, I even did a pretty good job. I need to maybe squidge around with some of the buttons because the button placement with the loops is causing it to look just a little off, but I mean, not really. I think it looks amazing. I'm so proud of my pattern matching. Let's talk about the guard. I don't think the guard makes a difference, at least not in this fabric and in the loop closure. I do maybe want to move these buttons just a little bit over so that gap will close up a bit, but overall it's not really that big of a gap. I mean, that's it without the guard behind it. That's why I would want to close that a little bit, but then like with the guard behind it, and that's with a light right here shining directly on me. I don't think for this closure, at least, the guard is really that necessary or that helpful. It also wasn't a ton of effort to put in, so it kind of would depend if you ever want to wear this vest open or not, which I think I do. Maybe you want to wear it open over a shirt or something, in which case I'll just remove the guard. It is not sewn in a way that it can't be removed at this point. In the video, as soon as I turn sideways, I think you can see the absolute cavern that this thing creates between the vest and my stomach. It is huge. Now, in the dress version, it's gonna be a little bit longer and you'll have the weight of the skirt pulling it down. Also, in a less structured fabric, it would drape more than in the seersucker, but this does look like the picture on the website. I have to give them that. I don't know why I was so surprised that it hangs out like this, because in the picture on the website, the vest that they made does this also. What I'm gonna do is try to bring in the sides a little bit. I thought about maybe some sort of fisheye dart, but I don't wanna mess up all the nice pattern. So I think I'm gonna try and just bring the sides in a little bit from my bust down. I don't want it to be skin tight. I just want it to not be so like gapey. So I, really fast, I'm gonna put this on inside out, pin it up, do some basting stitches and come back so we can see if it makes the improvement that I want it to make. I will be right back. I'm back, it's basted. It's gonna mess up my pattern matching and the sides, I think, but it's so much better. So I will take a little video clip where you can see how improved it is, but it fixed it exactly how I wanted. Like I said, I didn't want it super shaped or anything necessarily. I just wanted it brought in a little and it's perfect. I brought it in by 1 inch at the hem and then just tapered it up and ended that taper right about here. So I guess I can just show you here. Anyway, I'll include that video. Much, much better. To actually fix it properly, I'm gonna have to unpick the facing and everything. That does it for this first installment of our Style Arc Porter collaboration. I hope you enjoyed it. I wanna know in the comments down below if you've sewn the Porter, if you have been thinking about sewing the Porter. I was a little disappointed in this first piece, just because, like I said, it doesn't feel like it was intended to be a pattern for a vest like this, but I am glad I got to try out this style without having to buy a whole separate pattern. I do think I like it in general, especially now that I brought the bottom in a little bit. And I'm excited for future makes once we get going with the sleeves and stuff, because I'm really excited about all of the sleeve options. Go check out Stacey's video if you have not already checked it out. Like I said, it will be linked all kinds of places. And if you are new here, thank you so much for trusting Stacey and hopping on over. I hope you guys subscribe and stick around for future videos. I will see you on Friday for #FridaySews. Bye.